Sorry if my English can be a bit weak. It's not my mother language, but my language is a bit international. It's comic books. I am, when someone asks me what is my profession, what do I do for a living, I don't know how to answer exactly. Most of the time I say that I'm a comics critic, which means that I write reviews about comic books, but I also curate exhibition. I do a speech like this one. I can help for publishing books, many different activities around comics. I'm just going to share my screen. There it is. Sorry. And so I have started around the French, Franco-Belgian comic book industry, and slowly by slowly I worked on the whole world of comics to try to explore what's being published in different territories. So for a start, sorry, I need to get used to the tool. I think we are starting with a little question about all these different characters coming from different regions of the world, being created in different languages. The question will be asked to you very soon. How many of these characters can you name? I can tell you that there are some of these characters that have been created in French, some in English, some in Hindi, some in Italian, some in Portuguese, in Japanese, in Finnish, and in Tagalog. There is the question. I don't know how long we have to answer this. So during the presentation, we will find all these characters, these 10 characters. We will see them at different time. So maybe we're good at it. Should I submit mine? Okay, not bad. So I think it's time for this journey through the comics world. The first character you've seen on the top left is one of the most important for me. His name is Asterix, and it's from Asterix that I'm here, and that I am what I am, as would Popeye say. Asterix is probably the most popular French comic character. It was created in 1959, and I was born in 1965. And at that time, the character had become very, very important in France, very popular. And my father, that you see on the picture here, would read Asterix in the evening before going to bed. And I was getting asleep by hearing him laughing. He was laughing so hard, so loudly, it was a very powerful laugh that I was incited for that to learn how to read, because I wanted to be able to laugh as he did. And so that's how I grew up mostly. Let me tell you exactly who is Asterix. Asterix is a Gaul, and its adventures are comedy adventures. The Gauls are Celtic people that settled in what is now the territory of France 5 centuries before BC. And people in France in the official history were told that Gauls are the ancestors of French, and that each French citizen is supposed to be a descendant from the Gauls. So there is a strong link between Gauls and French people, and this comic book is getting a bit of a distance with the official history. The main topic of Asterix Adventures, it takes place 50 years BC, and at that time, Gaul had been invaded by Roman Empire and had become a part of the Roman Empire. Asterix and his fellow villagers are resisting against Romans, but they don't resist on the whole territory of Gaul or of France. They just resist in their own village, and they have a superpower. They have a very strong. They are very strong because they drink a magic potion that gives them this power. The example I'm showing here is one of the stories from 1975, Asterix and the Great Crossing. So I'm showing it to you here, what it looks like on the book. In this story, Asterix and his friend Obelix, who has a big, very powerful strength, they get lost when they go out on the sea. They go for fishing. They get lost, and they arrive in a new territory. Just trying to go back to my presentation. Sorry about that. There it is. I'm going to get used to it. So they arrive on a strange territory, which the readers know that they're in America, but they don't know. They don't know, and at first they think that they are still in Europe, not too far from their village, and they get caught by Native Americans, and so they have to introduce themselves. So I have a close-up on each strip. So they introduce themselves like this: we are brave. We have only one fear, that the sky may fall on our heads. We like a bit of joke. We like our food and drink. Sometimes we lose our tempers. We are rowdy lot and we like a punch-up. But we love our friends. In short, we are Gauls. Well, he gets the idea. In this page, it has become obvious, and that's what happened before, that French readers would identify themselves to Asterix and Obelix. The situation of Gaul being invaded by Romans happened in the history, but it reminded the readers about what happened in the World War II just 20 years before, and the resistance of Asterix towards Romans is an allusion, of course, to the resistance toward Nazis during Second World War. The fact that French would identify themselves to these icons was crucial at that moment, because France, that had been a colonial empire, was losing its colonies. And the question was, who are we exactly? And they could find the answer in these two characters, which means people that do have some strength, that do have some mind, but they're not colonialist. They travel a lot. They can help people, but they don't stay there. And of course, they have solidarity with each other. But most of the times they don't get along. But anyway, they can survive the different problems that occurs. Not only French would recognize themselves in Asterix and Obelix, but also foreigners would recognize the French in these two very funny characters who look like Laurel and Hardy. Um, and so there is this synchronicity, which is remarkable. And it's even more remarkable, and that's something that I started to study when I became a comic critic, that both of the creators of Asterix and Obelix, Albert Uderzo, who was the artist, who just passed away a month ago, and René Goscinny, the writer, were both sons of immigrants. Albert Uderzo is even has Italian origins. So what he was describing with the Roman enemies of Asterix and Obelix were his own ancestors. And René Goscinny has European Jewish origins from the Russian Empire. During his childhood, he was living in Argentina. When he became a young adult, he was living in New York. So these two immigrants, in fact, created the Super French. And that gives to these characters that could be called nationalist an image very more international than what people would think. So with this experiment of Asterix and with this attachment I have for these characters, my question then became, in the rest of the world, what are the other Asterix? And Asterix was not the only characters that fed me. There was Asterix when I was a kid, but then you had Tintin that most of you know probably. This journalist that goes through the world and discovers the world for its readers. The Smurf that are also well known and that can teach people how to live in a community. Titeuf that came later. I was already an adult. Titeuf is a young boy who wonders about the adult world, but it gave me a lot to think about how we could consider our society through the eyes of a kid. Not talking about Gaston Lagaffe, who's an office worker and who would do everything he can not to be productive. Or Blueberry, the cowboy created by Moebius, a well-known artist. This gives me my identity. I am French, but most of these characters, in fact, are Belgian or Swiss. So that's another level of complexity, and trying to attach one character, one icon to one country is something difficult. So we are going to go through this journey. The first thing that we have to do is to define comics. What are comics? In most part of the world, when I talk about comics, people already see what I mean. I discovered here that when I said that I'm a comic critic, some people thought that I would write reviews about stand-up comedians. So you have to precise that it's comic strips or comic books. In French, the name used for comics is most of the time bande dessinée, which means drawn strip. But before the 60s, the name was illustré, illustrated, that came from illustrated stories. But it was so badly interpreted, and people were, how do you say, were not very comfortable with this kind of expression, that you had to find a new name to get it more noble, more accepted, especially by teachers. In Spain, people say historietas in Spanish, which means little stories, small stories. In Portuguese, you would say quadrino, which means the square, it's the panel. In Italian, fumetti, little smoke. And there you design, it's just to point out the balloon. In Chinese, manhua, that means free image, gave manga in Japanese. And there is another name called lian huanhua, that also which means chain images. And as manhua and manga is the same word for cartoons, comic books, comic strips, and animated movies, when I am in China, the real name for comic strips, I discovered it going there, was Lianhuan Manhua, but that's a name that no one would choose to pronounce in common language. And if there is a scientific word to describe comic books, and that's a name that has been brought by Will Eisner, one of the most important comics authors, that's sequential art, the art of carrying a narration with a sequence of images. Which means that what are comics? What I do see as a comic book is, or as a comic story, is a narration with different panels where the reader has to imagine what's going on in between each panel to build up the story himself. In these two examples by Gary Larson, you can see the difference. And as a matter of fact, Gary Larson was most of the time much more efficient when he would use a single panel story by using, in fact, the comic book techniques. Because when you see this cartoon with a single panel, what is funny is to imagine what happened just before that that single panel cartoon. The other question comes, what are the origins of these comic books? And that's impossible to answer, because I found out that most of the ancient art, antique art that we could see, most of the times are consisted of sequential art, sequences of drawing to make up a story, sometimes mixing it with characters, such as this example here, which is 35 centuries ago. For some people, comic books start to exist when there are printings and when you can produce several examples to be several copies to be distributed in mass. So then the first cultures that developed printing on woodblock printings were cultures from Asia, from China, and the oldest example I could have seen was this Bomyong Shudo. It's a Buddhist tale from Korea, but there are probably examples in China that are even older. And for most European specialists, comic book starts with Rodolphe Töpfer, who's Swiss artist, with the invention of a new technique called the autograph. He could draw his own stories and then print it, like only 50 copies, and give it away to mostly his friends around him in Switzerland. But his stories were so powerful that they were reproduced after in France, in the United States, everywhere in what we call now the Western world. And that's how most of the time satire story started. in Europe and also in America in the second part of the 19th century. Then for some American specialists, comic art really starts at the end of the 19th century with this character, the Yellow Kid, by Richard Ortcott. And the Yellow Kid was published in a newspaper, popular newspaper. At that time, the technology was advanced enough so that it was possible to print daily news in mass. And so as the technology was there needed an economy. And for the economy, there's a need of a public, of a very wide public to be able to buy these daily papers. And it appeared that it was easier to sell these papers, these popular papers, with comics, with cartoons, than without.
Laurent,
And yes?
we have a question. Is there a way to make your screen full so the image appears bigger?
My screen full?
Yeah, right now we're seeing your actual screen, and within the screen a smaller rectangle that is the.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Not all right.
I'm
Maximize
sorry
the window.
about that. Thanks for telling me.
Sure.
I'm gonna try to solve this.
Okay. Maybe increase
maybe I have to go back here and.
Okay.
Is that better?
That's better. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Don't hesitate to interrupt me in that.
Okay, we'll do.
That case.
Thank you.
Yeah, I understand that it's probably not very.
Oh, that's good.
Very nice. Okay. So yeah, and sorry. So after this first comics on popular daily news, some magazines started to appear, even very early in Spain in 1919, but in most countries it appeared in the 30s with, well, you know, the comic books such as Action Comics, or magazines, weekly magazines in Europe. Right after the Second World War, the phenomenon became general. And for the new generation, the boomer that were just born after the war, new kind of magazines and heroes appeared, and it's like a golden age of world comics. There are examples here from the Philippines, from Mexico, from France, from Denmark, from Germany, from the United States, and from Japan. You can see Tetsuwan Atom, the creation of Osamu Tezuka, who's considered as the creator of modern mangas. And I think that Tetsuwan Atom is called, like in France here, Astro Boy. That character became internationally known. The boomers grew up, and in the 60s, they needed to build their own culture and to have their own iconic characters, and also to challenge the morality. So it could go through different ways. It could go through humor. It could go through violence. It could go through also sex, drug, and rock and roll. And on that field, Austin had a very important role, as it's in Austin that there was a young student who had a folk band with Janis Joplin. He was a student in UT, created the fabulous Freak Brothers that became internationally known. And it's the stories of three hippies that will do everything they can just to get laid and get a joint to smoke, and of course because of that they have many different adventures. I'm very fond of Gilbert Shelton, who who created these characters in Austin and who now lives in Paris, very close from my own district. At the end of the century, comic books that were sold in newsstands started to be sold in bookstores. It depends on the country, on different cultures, but that led also to recognition and intellectual recognition of these creations that most of the times were just sold in magazines to be read and thrown away after. And at the moment when it goes into books and into bookstores, more and more people are starting to keep them. To that point, any questions? Okay, so
questions, you can put them type them in the box there, and we'll make sure to get them to Laurent, and he's happy to stop and answer them. Laurent will let you know if anyone gives us a question, okay?
Okay, so we start the journey. Excuse me, we're starting the journey around the world. That's one way to study these word comics. And we're starting with Argentina. Why am I starting with Argentina? Because many years ago, about 30 years ago, someone from Argentina told me when we were talking about Asterix, he said, yeah, you have Asterix, but we have in Argentina the real Asterix. It's an Indian called Pato Rudzu. And well, that kind of stuff, probably everywhere in the world you can find equivalents of a character such as Asterix. So I could have just forget about it. But I knew that René Goscinny, the writer of Asterix, grew up in Argentina in the 30s, which is when this character was created. Not only that, but with Albert Uderzo, one of their first comic books before creating Asterix was Papa, who was also a Native American. So there is a link, and now it's established that René Goscinny was inspired by this character, Pato Rudzu, who's a Native American, but from Argentina, from Patagonia, who lives in the modern Argentina, and he's like a resistant to modernity and to the surrealistic world that comes from it, from the attachment of people through cars, through TVs, etc. And not only that, after studying, when I studied René Goscinny's life, after being after growing up in Argentina, he started as an artist in New York. And there he was sharing a workshop with most people who created Mad Magazine. So this image of Asterix as a super French, it's not that French. It got influences from different cultures in the world, including also from Ashkenazis village in Russia or Poland.
Laurent, we have a question.
Yes.
How or where does the graphic novel fit into this story about comics? So I guess
at the end.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, it does, of course. It will come at the end. You have to wait. I'm sorry about that. I'm going from Argentina to Chile with Condorito. Condorito is a human condor. It was created in 1949 by Pepo, and the character itself is even older. It's the story of someone who comes from a village in the mountains and gets in the city, and he has a lot of trouble understanding what's going on. It's like he's like the people from popular society who has trouble making his way, and most of it are just jokes for one page or 2 pages, and at the end of each gag of each story, he or another character falls back with this sound plop. And Condorito is popular in Chile, but everywhere in Spanish American countries. It's now owned by a Mexican communication group. And what's funny is that I've seen people from Peru, from other countries, really thinking that Condorito is their own. So it's a character that doesn't know any border. And in Brazil, Monica, who was one of the characters you've seen before. So Monica's gang, created by Mauricio de Souza, it's enormous over there. It's like the comic book, the comic characters with whom most Brazilians have learned how to read now. If you go into a newsstand, you will find piles of different Monica Gangs comics. I'm going to show them to you. There it is, one of these little magazines. Each month you have about 10 different titles being sold in the newsstands. To give you an idea about the size, this is Patoruzzo that I showed you. It was published as a comic strip, so it has this shape. This is a Condorito magazine from the 70s. And this is Monica, something that everyone reads in Brazil. And so it's, sorry, I'm going back to the presentation. There. So it's extremely popular. Everyone can identify himself in one of the different characters of Monica's gang. And the creator, Mauricio de Souza, is a real star in Brazil, a real icon for the whole country. Recently, the Minister of Education in Brazil tried to use Monica for a small tweet carrying some kind of plot about coronavirus from China. And that was a disgrace for a lot of people to try to get this character into his ideology, his nationalist ideology. So I'm going to follow up with South America. Recently, this book was published by a teacher who's maybe following us, Christopher Sperandio, from Rice University in Houston. And this is a book where he has reproduced a story from a remarkable Mexican artist. And in the introductions, he tells about the situation of comics in Mexico. Sorry, I lost my little. Oh yes, there it is. And Mexico is probably one of the most important countries about Brazil, about comics. Sorry about that. It's written at its peak. At its peak, Mexico was the world's largest per capita consumer of comics, with a monthly production of 28 to 30 million copies in 1970, 1971, and 80 million in 1981, 1982. The country's population in those years was 31 million to 71 million, respectively, and it's estimated that each Mexican read 3 to 4 comics on average every month. There's probably not many countries that have been reading so many comic books. And so sorry, going back to the screen there. one of these very popular comic books is Memin Penguin, and I want to say something about this character that was created in the 40s and was still published until the end of the 90s. Memin Penguin is a young African American boy, and he appears like what some people would feel like a racist caricature. It's, I think, one of the most dramatic misunderstandings that can happen. The fact that some authors can use caricature, just like Uderzo for Asterix, people can be offended by the way he draws Native Americans, for example, but that's also the way that he draws French people through the Gauls. Using this caricature doesn't mean that you want that the author has the meaning to offend people. And that was the case for Memin Penguin, who's a hero, such a popular hero that he was printed on stamps, and that's when some controversies occurred in the United States, because the magazines don't travel a lot, but stamps do. And so some people in the United States blamed Memin Penguin as racist comic books. It was banned from some libraries, while in fact the intention is obviously not racist. Memin Penguin is the hero of these stories, and on the left here you can see the cover of one of the stories that takes place in Texas, where Memin Penguin travels with his friends, the other friends Mexican, who are white, and they want to have a Coca-Cola. They go into a bar where it's during segregation, where black people are not allowed. And they get into a fight because of that, and they all go to jail. So it's always, you always need to know exactly the context of a story before, you know, before putting the blame on it. So we're still traveling. Now we're crossing the ocean, going to Africa, a continent where it's hard, it's very hard to have a precise image of the comic industry, because there are lots of countries with economical weakness, which means also mean of production very weak and mean of distribution very weak. But there is one country where comic book are in the French speaking countries where comic book is important. It's in Ivory Coast with this magazine, Gbish, that has over 20 years of existence now. Gbish is a magazine including articles, cartoons, and comic book and comics. These comics have ongoing stories, jokes with different heroes who can represent some different part of the Ivory Coast society. One of the most popular hero is Kofi Gombo, who's a businessman who always who's very greedy and would do impossible things just to get a bit more money. What's funny about Kofi Gombo is that it's a self-caricature of the manager of the magazine, Lassane Zohore. And another one, Sergent de Togo. De Togo is the coin, one of the lower coin used in French-speaking African countries. And Sergent de Togo is the cop that would arrest everyone and would find any way, any accusation to get his coin. And there he arrested a taxi for being overcharged. And the taxi driver tells him, how come we are 5 people? And as there is a pregnant woman sitting on the front, he said, no, you are 5.5, so give me 2 Togos. I'm going to Asia. If you go to China, there is a very important character, San Mao. San Mao is an orphan living in the streets of Shanghai just right after the war. And most of his, it's an ongoing stories that were published in a daily newspaper during a year, where the readers can see how he struggles to survive, and sometimes with humor. This character has been raised after the Communist Party took the power in 1949, but the author, the creator of San Mao himself, Zhang Leping, was not a member of the party of the Communist Party, and he suffered all his life of the situation, even before and after the communists took power in over China. I'm going back to the screen, I mean to the camera, just to show you the other kind of comic books that you can find in China. These comic books are called Lianhuanhua, chained image. It's very small. There is 1 image per page, and most of the time the art is brilliant, really wonderful, and it's a whole universe to explore. Of course, propaganda is a big is big in this in these little magazines, but the art is big also. Going back to the screen. Sorry if it takes time. I'm not too used to that. So this is an example of Le Noir Noir, and the example of the kind of wonderful art that you can find in these little books. If you go to Korea, where the name of comics is manhwa, there comics are very important too, but this country had such a development, moved so much since the 1950s to now, that when there was a very popular comic book, most of the time it wouldn't stay long. So there has been a lot, but as the country was moving on, comics supports were changing, and there was also an important the government would interfere a lot in the creation, so that most of the great popular comics were changing each 5 years. You have a different example here from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then 80s. And in North Korea also there are comic books. And these ones, I don't know them. I never went to North Korea. And I guess that it will take time for me to go there. When I've heard of it for the first time, I thought it would be like the Chinese Lan Honghua. But in fact, I found out that it looks more like maybe Japanese manga, a mixing of Japanese manga and Italian comics. And going to Europe, where mostly each country has its own comic books and comic icon. In Spain, Mortadelo y Filemon are two spies, very funny. It's completely surrealistic. One of them is an art in is a master in the art of disguise. He can dress himself into a phone booth or into a crocodile. And these characters were created during Franco's regime, totalitarian regime, and it was like a way of escaping from the very hard reality in Spain for the readers. And Mortadelo y Filemon still exist with the same creator, with the same author. There is one new comic album of 70 page each quarter. And it's also a way to talk about the actuality. So I guess next Mortadelo y Filemon will probably be talking about COVID-19. And there you have one of them very recent, where you can see the president of a country on the cover, just there.
Laurent, we have a question.
Yes.
Actually, a suggestion for the future and a question. The suggestion for the future is maybe we can do something in the future where you dig into one country in more detail. People are interested in hearing more of the story, but that's for later. Right now, the question is, could Laurent speak briefly to women in comics? When did women and girls appear as main characters, and what point did women actually make comics?
Well, women in comics have always been present. Most of the time, they wouldn't be allowed to have the first role. But for example, one of the pioneer of British comics is Marie Duval. The first, I don't remember her name, the first comic writer in French was also a woman. There has been, it was coming, the presence of women in comics has been coming back and forth. There has been a lot of women in the underground comic industry, carrying on feminist ideas. Then in the 80s, there was like a drawback. And recently with graphic novels, and also thanks to mangas, where there are a lot of comic creator and comic books for girls, there are more and more comic artists in the world industry. That's on the way. We'll see other characters that have been created by women, but the most of the most of the place has been taken by men, I would say. So yeah, I was still. Is there any other question now?
No, people are commenting back and forth to one another, but no questions for you yet.
Okay. Okay. So in Belgium, many of you know about Tintin, but Tintin is the main comics character for French-speaking Belgium. In the Dutch-speaking Belgium, such as in the Netherlands, there is another very important comic books is Zusk and Wiske, that were created by Willy van der Steen, such as Mortadelo y Filemon. These characters have a new comic album, a new book each quarter, and they sell several 100,000 of copies each quarter, which makes something very big. And if you go to Russia, the name of comic books is Komiksi. Be very careful when you pronounce that word, because during USSR time, comics were supposed to be some kind of depraved form of art sent by Americans to witness youth. And some people are still into that idea toward comics. So it can be touchy. Just to say that you read comics, people can think that you're an idiot. But you can talk about graphic novels eventually, but you can talk also about someone called Herluf Bichtrup. And then you would see everyone smiling, having big eyes. Herluf Bichtrup was a comic artist. He was published in different magazines, including Crocodile, which was a caricature magazine, and was very successful. People would read it without knowing that they were reading comics. And as you can notice, his most of his art is without lyrics, just like a pantomime, and it can be explained by the fact that Herluf Bichtrup, who was honored with the medal of Stalin's medal, Lenin's medal, was not a Russian nor Soviet. He was from Denmark. And he used to work for the Daily Communist News in Denmark, and started working for USSR. And there he became a star. That's saying that doesn't mean that in other countries from the Soviet influence, comics wouldn't exist. Here are two examples from very popular comic books in Eastern Germany, Dig Dag und Diggedag, sorry, and from Poland. So I did this journey around the world, but as I said, it's not enough for trying to understand what are comics on the planet. So I have another part that will last probably 15 minutes. If there are any questions now, I can answer or keep on going.
Let me ask Laurent if people have any questions. We have 41 people, so some have had to leave, and we had some join late. If you're joining late, Laurent.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Comics around the world and how they work and what they say, maybe what they say about us. Anyone have a question for Laurent before he goes to the next section? You can type it in the box, or maybe even just unmute your mic and ask him. I mean, anyone have a question for Laurent?
Okay.
Okay, Laurent, you're on.
Going back. So the thing is, each country doesn't have a closed border, even now. And influences have been traveling on the whole planet from continent to continent, from countries to countries, since the beginning. And I guess you're not surprised by this. So, for example, one of the satire comics, European satire comics from 19th century, Max und Moritz by Wilhelm Busch, had so much influence that when the American publishers were looking for comic strips to publish in the dailies, one of these publishers asked a young artist, Rudolf Dirks, to inspire himself from Max und Moritz from Germany, and as Rudolf Dirks was born in Germany, to do his own comics. And that gave the Katzenjammer Kids that probably most of you know. Katzenjammer Kids were one of the first syndicated comic strips, which means comics that were produced to be syndicated, to be published in different new daily papers in the whole territory of the United States or of North America. With such a technique, allowing the same comic strip to be published everywhere in North America, that gave ideas. And why not publishing these comic strips on a global scale, and that's what happened. And at the same time, people were these comic strips were so popular that they were mixing with popular culture. And you can say that comic strips and movies were hand by hand and were like dancing together. For example, Charlie Chaplin became popular in 1914 by his movies in America. And just a year later, he became a comic character, with the fact that in comics, you can have lyrics, you can have dialogues that they were not in the movies at that time. The first artist who drew Charlie Chaplin was Stuart Carothers. Sadly, he passed away a year after starting working on Charlie Chaplin, and the next artist was Elzie Segar. And Elzie Segar worked on Charlie Chaplin for maybe a year or two, and then created his own comic strips, his own creation, Thimble Theater. And that's in this comic strips that 10 years later, in 1928, he created Popeye. And Popeye became also a movie star through animated movies. So these two medias were really working together, and sometimes also with the help of pulp magazines and popular literature. And what was a big moment also was with the popularity of Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse getting into comic strips. Walt Disney was not very volunteer for that, but the demand was high, so high that, as you can see on the bottom on the left, in Italy in 1930, the first Mickey Mouse comics were released, and they were without being allowed, without authorization from Walt Disney. So Walt Disney had to control that other market and started producing its own comic books, first adapted from his movies, and then new material, and that the popularity became bigger when not with Mickey Mouse, not with the universe of mouses was developed, but with the universe of ducks. And an American artist, Karl Barks, created Uncle Scrooge, that became also a world icon. And everywhere in the world, there are Walt Disney's comics being created, not only in the United States. There is an example, Topolino. It's Giorgio Cavazzano, who's one of the most famous Disney artists today, or the baby Disney that were created by Claude Marin in France in the 60s. But I'm going back to comic strips. Comic strips are important in humor comics, but also in adventure comics. We just have two major examples. Tarzan, that came from Pulp's magazine, and Flash Gordon, created by Alex Raymond for comic strips, but who also became a movie star. And of course, there's not only in America that comic strips started to be created. In France, in 1948, for example, José Cabrero Arnal, who was an artist from Spain who had to flee Spain during the Civil War, who was a Republican. In France, he was arrested by Nazis and was prisoner in the camps in Mauthausen. When he was released, he started working for the communist daily news, L'Humanité. That's where he created Pif le chien, Pif the dog, who became so popular that he's called like the French Mickey Mouse, and the magazine was created after. In the bottom, you have Madame and Eve. Madame and Eve is a South African comic strips that was created in 1992, so just 2 years before the end of apartheid, and it's stories of excuse me, a white woman and her maid, who's black, and they have to go through the changing of the countries. And that comic strip is still going on. Here I published one of the most recent one, which is about the lockdown that we all know. In Northern Europe, comic strips also had a revival in the 90s. At that time, that's where the first free daily news were created. And that was also a good place for starting new kind of comic strips, very contemporary. Here are two examples. Vivi ja Wagner, which is from Finland, by Yuba. You have here, it was one of the characters I used at the beginning. And Nemi by Lise from Norway. It's the jokes from a young woman. This is a woman artist and a woman creation. It's a comic strip popular in all Northern Europe, but also in the UK. From comic strips arrived comic books. At the beginning, it was just a way to collect comic strips and to give them away as a bonus for people who would bought soap, for example. And the publishers started to realize that it was also possible to sell these books, and then to have a new material being especially created for this publication. That's how that happened. Excuse me. That happened in New York, and in New York in the 30s, these publishers needed to find artists who would have a lot of imagination and who were able to create and to create for a very low price. So they needed new and young artists, and most of these artists that they found were artists from the Jewish immigration, from the second generation. Their concern at that time is, of course, that that threat that is growing in Europe, the Nazism that is taking all over the country, such as a monster more powerful than humanity. And so they had to create their own heroes to fight Nazism. And these heroes were superheroes. You can notice that Superman, as the origins of Superman are about the same than the origin of Moses, a baby that is that has to escape from his planet or from his country to be the last remainder of its culture. So Superman just escaped through space, and Moses through the water of the Nile, but it's the same influence. And Captain America, created in 1940s, obviously to promote the fight against Nazism. So I'm a bit annoyed by superheroes here in America, and by this overwhelming situation they have over mainstream comics. But I like to study and to see what's behind these superheroes, and I call that with great heroes come great humanity, because this influence didn't stay in the United States. One of the first countries to adopt superheroes are the Philippines, where the influence of the United States is important. And there was an artist and story writer, Mars Ravello, who created a whole universe, such as Stan Lee, of superheroes. What's noticeable is that the most popular of this superhero is Darna, and it's a superheroine. It's a woman, and it's a some. When you see her like this, you can think about Wonder Woman. And Nestor Mars Ravello always said that he was not inspired by Wonder Woman. He didn't even know Wonder Woman when he created Darna in 1947, but he was inspired by Superman. The fact that he chose a woman to be his hero is not that surprising when you think of the fact that the country, one of the country where gender equality is the most noticeable out of Northern European countries are the Philippines. And so two presidents of the Philippines have been women already. And so it's not that surprising that there, the icon is a woman. Long time ago, talking with some international specialists, and one of them is listening to me right now, we had a discussion about the fact that most superheroes could find their equivalent in the Indian mythology. And so it's not surprising to see superheroes in India. In 2004, Marvel comic groups allowed a publisher, an Indian publisher, to have his own Spider-Man being produced there. But already there were a lot of superheroes created by a publisher called Raj Comics, mostly established in Rajasthan. And the most popular of these heroes is Nagraj. He's like Spider-Man, but not with spiders, with snakes. And I've seen recently that there is a movie under production. I hope that it was not stopped by COVID-19 problem. In the Middle East, nearly many countries have superheroes also. The first comic book in Algeria was a superhero. There are lots of superheroes in Israel also. In 2007, in Kuwait, Naif Al-Mutawa, who's a psychologist, decided to create his own line of comics with superheroes, the 99. Each of these characters would have the power coming from one of the 99 virtues of Islam. What he wanted to do there is to give another image of Islam to Muslim people, to the young readers in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, in all the Arabo-Muslim countries, but also abroad, out of the Muslim area, to get Islam culture into some kind of modernity with these characters that would look like the X-Men, for example.
Laurent?
Yes?
We have another question. Someone wants more information about the Israeli superheroes. Can you say a little bit more about those?
Yeah, that's it's so long that I didn't want to introduce it here. There was one superhero called Sabraman that was nearly created like a fanzine by a young artist who was 15 at that time, who's now the most popular comic creator in Israel. He went to the army, and after that he couldn't consider seriously superheroes. So after he had superheroes, but comedy superheroes. And there is another artist coming from the United States who's half Lebanese and half Israeli, half Jew from his origins, Michael Letzner, who created Uri On, which is a kind of Israeli Superman. And this one is very nationalist and very close from, let's say, the extreme right in Israel. I don't know his character very much. I don't know him very much. I know that this artist did was the teacher for a lot of modern Israeli comic artists that don't share his political view, but he's been influential. I can try to show you, but it's somewhere in the back. I have one of these magazines here, but it's so complex, and we have so few time that I cannot develop here. And I had read an article by Naif Al-Mutawa where he was stating that he knew that by creating the 99, he was also using characters that he narrated from the Jewish culture. And unfortunately, was it financially or politically, he had to stop this production in 2014. He was attacked by religious groups in Saudi Arabia. He had trials, which he all won. But then I guess his company ran out of money and he cannot publish them anymore. There was a crossover between the GLA and the 99, and the 99 were also quoted by Barack Obama as an example of modernity in Islam. So that's about the superheroes. There's one territory where superheroes don't work, even if they have existed superheroes, but most of the time it's comedy heroes, superheroes. It's in Europe, even though there has been some great superheroes in Great Britain. Or Great Britain comic artists did participate a lot in American superheroes. But in Europe, there were other very influential comics, and that came from Italy. From Italy in 1948 was created this character, Tex Wheeler, who has for a model Gary Cooper. So it's a Western action comic books. At the beginning, it started with what you can see on the upper left. It started as striche, like comic strips that were sold weekly. You had 36 strips in one volume. And then it became monthly with this type of format. Sorry, I will show you later. Pocket size publication. Tex is the most popular comic character in Italy. It's published each month. Each month there are 100 pages of adventure of Tex, and even each year there is a special Tex adventure of 240 pages, which is the opportunity to have international comic artists working on that. And one of the most renowned of these artists was Joe Kubert, who's probably one of the 10 most appreciated comic book artists in the history, who worked also on text. And so from this character, the writer, Gianluigi Bonelli, created a whole universe of comics. And still today, if you go into a newsstand in Italy, you will find all his productions, all his monthly production, very, very well placed. So it looks, there it is. This is what you can get in Italian newsstands. These type of books are also still popular in Northern Europe, in Brazil, in Turkey, which makes it, I think that Italian comic books are widely read in the world. They have several million readers in the world. maybe not as much as American or Japanese comic books, but it is still something very important, and there are still movies being produced out of these heroes. I'm going back to there it is. And so Italy became the center of world comic publication. And to give you an example, in Argentina, a young comic artist was living there. His name is Hugo Pratt, was Hugo Pratt. Hugo Pratt, very well known, worldly known now for his creation Corto Maltese. So his first comic books, he did them with a comic writer, Hector Oesterheld, and they were not working for an Italian or for an Argentinian publisher. They were looking for working for a British publisher, and that British publisher, after publishing this this other Western adventure comics, would then sell it all over the world, in France, in Italy, in Argentina. Another of this hero, Il Grande Black, created in Italy, who's you know, the trapper hero, who's fighting against for the freedom of his country, which are the United States, against the British colonies. So this hero was popular in Italy, but was much more popular in France. And he was so popular that the French publisher had to produce his own stories, because he would publish two books a month when the Italians would publish only one. And where was Black very popular? Not on what is the French territory now, even if he was, but it was in the French colonies in Africa, because there a hero who was fighting for the independence of his country meant something. And even today, if you go to French-speaking African countries, if you talk about comic books, many people will tell you about Black, not about Asterix, Tintin, or Superman. And I was talking about manga. Of course, these are the new big influence around the world. Mangas came to Western country mostly by TV. Just another thing I wanted to show you. For us, mangas are pocket-sized books. But in fact, mangas, this is a manga magazine, Shonen Jump, the most popular. Mangas are published weekly. It's 500 pages, enormous production. People buy it and then throw it away. And the most popular episodes, the most popular characters published in these magazines are then published in books and then adapted into anime, into movies that are then distributed through TVs. And that's how they arrived in Western countries. So what we know of mangas, of Japanese comics, is just a small portion of it. Going back to the shared screen. And that popularity is so strong that it participated in world popular culture. I have the example also by Osamu Tezuka of Jungle Tatei that was adapted not officially by Disney Studios and became King Leo. This influence was so big that in some countries where comics didn't really exist or had to stop, could start again by inspiring young artists. So you have here 3 different examples. Labstar, which is a magazine from Algeria. Algeria had suffered during 1 decade of terrorism, and everything stopped there, including comics. Pentagon magazine from Armenia, which was one of the Soviet Republic, where comics were banned, and it's young women who were working with teenagers who had the idea of doing their own comics after seeing a manga on internet translated into Russian. And of course, it was something not an official publication. And in Vietnam, this Tan Dong Dat Viet, uh, which seems to be, I never went to Vietnam, someone brought it back to me. And some other people from Vietnam told me that it's a monthly story sold in newsstands that has a big influence now.
Laurent, we're sort of at an hour and change. We have 30 people of the original 50 still with us. Maybe
Good.
you can sum up something and we'll give them time for questions.
Yeah. So I was talking about graphic novels. Graphic novels is a way to address to another public, to address to the educated class. And it started here in the US with Will Eisner that I told you about recently. And it gives, in fact, what defines to me a graphic novel is the fact that an author can have his own creation without having to rely on a format on a commercial format. For example, on comic books or on the albums that we do have in European countries. Or on mangas where you need to have an episode of 20 pages each week. An author is free of his creation of the length of his story with a graphic novel, and a graphic novel will be mostly sold in bookstores and not in newsstands. So I don't have much time to develop it. The fact is that there is a real network of graphic novels through the world. That means that you don't need to have a massive readership to get published, and to get published in different countries. So I have examples of graphic novels that became very, very important when Mouse was published by Art Spiegelman in the 80s. An example from Japan, from Syria, from Ivory Coast, from France, from China, from Iran, from Russia, and from the Philippines. All books that I would recommend very strongly. And I do read graphic novels. I like to read them, but sometimes I have the nostalgia of this character that would address to a massive readership, and that would make people get together around one culture. So I'm afraid that graphic novels don't have that impact. But from Korea, we go back to Korea, were created comics, digital comics, to be read mostly on smartphone screens, webtoons that you read by, vertical scrolling. And that's something new. That's a new form of popular comics. It was created 20 years ago, and now it's becoming worldwide. So there is a future for comics, and it doesn't mean that comics have to go always on paper.
We have another question, and maybe we can have everyone else, if you have a question, type in. This one is, has the Charlie Hebdo attack had a chilling effect on French satirical comics?
Yeah. That's long. When I was talking about Memin Penguin and the controversy about the fact that people would feel offended by this character without knowing the context, That's what happened to Charlie Hebdo also. Plus manipulation and massive manipulation through the through social networks. So yeah, Charlie Hebdo is mostly a cartoon magazine, but most of the artists that were killed that day were also comic artists and great comic artists. So what can I tell about that? The fact that now many artists can have self-censorship. Many of them need to explain what they're doing, but we are now in a scary era where anyone can manipulate what you produce, and you don't know what will happen after. I don't know what else to say. That would need probably a long time of exchange about that subject, and I have a presentation about the history of Charlie Hebdo, and I can spend an hour or 2 hours talking about it.
I have a question, unless someone has one. I'm struck, Laurent, that a lot of the comic authors and artists in one country are actually immigrants from another country. It came up several times in your talk. Asterix, and was a Russian from Denmark, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Of course, the American Superman creators were Jews, and they were considered outsiders for a long, long time, maybe still are altogether. So I guess my question is, what is it about the comic book form that lets these immigrants tell a different story? It's got to be something about it that's not poetry, it's not film, it's not photography, and the immigrants have taken to it to tell a story in a different way. Is there something special there?
Immigrants are strong in most artistic field because they're bringing something different with them. In the comic industry, in the 20th century, it was popular reading, popular mass production. So as what happened in New York, there was a need for people who could work who could work for a low price, not the price, or I don't know if it's the correct term, that would not with the salary that would get an established artist. And most of the times it's immigrants. And also comics is a mixing of texts and drawings. And so you need to mix everything. You need also to mix the influences. And there, some immigrants can be very strong.
Maybe immigrants see their new countries in different perspectives, and therefore they mix the art and the text to tell us a story. I mean, until I heard that, I was thinking of the Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, about comics. And until I read that, I had no idea that they were outsiders, and of course Superman is the commensurate insider. I mean, he's the American story. So, and Asterix as well, two people from another country telling a quote unquote French story, right?
Yeah, and they were. I mean, they were two artists who were who were feeling deeply French, and they idealized their vision of France through Asterix, but still with the perspective of an immigrant, of someone from a foreign perspective.
And I think it changes what it means to be French, right? If you're French in the 50s and you read the comics in the 60s, now you think of France differently.
Probably, even though people wouldn't notice it. They didn't know about that. Such as, lots of readers in America, when they were reading Superman, were maybe pro-Nazis or had anti-Semitic feelings. And they didn't know that they were reading a Jewish story.
Yeah, and precisely. And I love the 99 story about the Muslim world.
Yeah.
It strikes me that it reaches a different audience to do it in a comic book than, say, a news story or a history class.
Yeah.
You know.
That's each time there is a story to tell around these comics, and there are big stories with their creators.
Anyone have any more questions? I mean, I might, because one of our comments, Laurent, was to do a deep dive into one of these or two of these particular countries with their comic books to explore these questions. I mean, I love the survey from around the world, and it sounds like some of our participants here would love to hear more about the 99 or more about, any particular story and comic book and what it tells us about the country and what it tells us about ourselves. But let me make sure I haven't neglected anybody, because I know people are signing out to go to other meetings and whatnot. Does anyone have any questions for Laurent? Anybody?
Well,
merci bien, merci mille fois. I enjoyed this so much, and Laurent, the text box is full of compliments and comments. People want to hear more, so maybe we'll figure out a way when you're back in Paris to do that deep dive into one or two of these textbooks.
with great pleasure, of course. And,
no,
I will try. I'm sorry, because I knew that I was going to be a bit over the hour. But I didn't think that it was going to be that long.
Well, if you're passionate about it, that's exactly what these people want to hear, because I think we still have 25 people. And one of them said he'd love a deeper dive into Indian and British and Israeli comics. Maybe we figure out a way to make this some
also, I didn't explore much of Indian comics, as I never went to India. There are other comics than the one I showed. Lots of other comics.
The demand here is pretty high, and there's still 24 people here. So I'm going to sign off because I have some childcare duties to. But sorry. Merci mille fois. À la prochaine. Everybody else, thank you. We will send you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Plus the recording here. Xbox has questions, and if you have questions for Laurent, we did not get to. My email is jackgm, general manager at stedwards.edu. I'll pass them along to Laurent. Thank you, everybody. Enchanté. Survive and thrive in whatever the world is facing right now. And again, Laurent, merci. Très sympa. And we'll email to you. We have your email when you signed up, so you'll get a PDF, a recording, and questions for Laurent. You can find him on Facebook. That's where I found him just last week, I think. So again, merci. Tout le monde, à la prochaine, and we'll see you soon.
And thanks to everyone at St. Edwards. It was wonderful to be able to do that.
It was our pleasure.